Hello everyone and welcome back. So today we are going to be building apps that's showing the list of API. As you can see here, this is the final project, and if I refresh the browser, we get the loading skeleton, and then we get the button filters here and the card here. Okay, and as you can see up here, we have the search functionality, we have the button filter and the list here. Alright, so the first time we refresh the browser, we get the category animals, okay? And if I click, for example, programming, we get the category programming. If I click security, we get the security. If I click text analysis, we get text analysis. Alright, so really nice. If I search for example, I'm going to search for docs, alright? If I click enter, we get the docs here. If I search for text, maybe if I click enter, we get text. All right, so really nice. And this will be responsive. If I open in a mobile, it's gonna be look like this. All right, so really nice, guys. And then we are going to be building this with React, and then we are gonna use Tailwind for the styling, and for the icon, this icon search here, I grab from the hero icons, and then from the API, we are going to use this API here, api.publicapis.org. Alright, so that's what we are going to be building, and let's get started. So in here, I've already generated React apps. So now let's open the API-4-fun into the VS Code. So let's first remove a couple files that we don't need. I'm going to remove the app test, the logo, reported files, and setup tests. Right, so let's remove everything and let's open the terminal. Wait, in terminal here, I'm gonna say yarn start. Okay, that's gonna be start the development server, and it's gonna be crash for the first time because in the index here we need to remove the report web files here. Okay, and in app we need to remove the header. Let's remove this and put h1, and I'm going to say hello. Let's remove everything up here. Alright, so now we should see hello. Really nice, cool. So first let's install the Tailwind CSS. I'm going to go to tailwindcss.com, go to the documentation and click the framework guides, click the create React app, and we are going to copy this and put that into the terminal. Paste that in here and click enter. Alright, so it's done. Let's go back to the Tailwind documentation. So next we need to copy this tailwind config.js file. Let's go to tailwind config.js file and paste the code here. And next we need to copy this index.css. Let's go to index.css and paste the code here. Save. Alright. So now we should restart the server. Let's say yarn start. I'm gonna close this terminal here. So now let's create the input search UI. I'm gonna back to the code and let's close the terminal here. I'm gonna create folder called components. Let's say components, and inside this components, I'm gonna create a file called jumbotron.js file. Okay, so in here, let's generate functional path component, and I'm going to save. Let's go to app, and in here let's remove the class name, we don't need that. And in here I'm going to render the Jumbotron. Let's say Jumbotron. All right, so if I save, now we should see Jumbotron right here. Okay, now let's styling this Jumbotron. So in here, I'm going to implement the background gradient. So let's go to Tailwind here and let's go to background color stops. And I'm going to use this gradient here. Okay, I'm going to copy that and paste that in here. Okay, so of course we need to add class name set equals to this one here. Okay, so inside in here, basically we have history. And let's say history, and let's say search APIs. Okay, so now save and let's take a look. Here we go, we have the background gradients, really nice. So let's add the text center to make the content into center, and I'm gonna add padding vertically into 20. and I'm going to say padding horizontally to 2. Okay, so in hash3 I'm going to add the class name as well. So let's say class name set it equals to the text. I'm going to say text to XL to make it a little bit bigger, and the text is going to be white, and also the font, I'm going to say font semi bold. Okay, so now save and let's take a look. Really nice. And let's make it smaller sidebar here so you can see clearly. Let's add a div, and inside this div we have 2 components. The first thing is input and then the button. Okay, we are going to add basically display flags in this div here. So let's say display flags, items to center, and let's say the margin top, I'm going to say 6, and maximal width, let's say medium, and also I'm going to say MX to auto to make it a center, and also the background I'm going to change that to white, and also the rounded I'm going to say medium. All right, so now save and let's take a look. This is the input field and this is the button. So now let's styling the input field. Let's make it like this so you can see the code clearly. Alright, so here I'm going to add the class name, set that equals to the width, I'm going to set that to full, and the padding horizontally I'm going to set that to 4, padding vertically let's say 2, and then the rounded I'm going to set that to medium, and also the, let's say the the text gray, let's say 800. And also if I focus on the input field, I need to remove the outline, so outline none. Okay, so now save and let's take a look. We have beautiful input here. So now let's add the placeholder, set that equals to, I'm gonna say random fact of dogs. Okay, it's going to be capital R, like so. Nice. So now let's styling this button here. I'm going to go back to the VS Code and let's add the class name, so that equals to the background. I'm going to change that to blue 500, and also the width I'm going to set that to 20, and also the height, let's say 12. The text is going to be white, and also the rounded right is going to be medium. And also I'm gonna say flex and item center, I think item center, and justify center as well. Okay, so now save and let's take a look. We have beautiful button here. So now let's change this text search here with icons. So let's go to hero icons and search for search. Okay, this one here, I'm gonna copy the JSX and let's paste that in here. Okay, so let's paste that in here. Okay, and here we go. So now save and let's take a look. We have beautiful icon here. So now let's create the useAxios hooks. In the source here, I'm going to create a folder called hooks. Let's say hooks, and inside this hooks, I'm going to create a file called useaxios.js file. So in here, let's say rfce, and hit enter. We have useAxios, and we don't need to return the JSX in here. We need to return object, but before that we need to install the Axios. So in here I'm going to say yarn add Axios and hit enter. Alright, now it's done. Let's close the terminal, and I'm going to create a state. Let's say cons response and set response, set that equals to use state. By default is going to be empty object, and then we also have the loading, and set loading by default is going to be false. All right, and also we have the error. So let's say cons error, error, and set error by default is going to be null. All right, so now here let's create a function called fetch data. This is going to be arrow function, and this is going to be async await function. So let's add async a keyword right there, and in here I'm going to use try and catch. So let's say try catch, and down here we get a finally. All right, so in try here I'm going to set the loading to true. Okay, and also in here I'm going to create a variable called response, set that equals to, let's say Axios. Just make sure you import Axios up here, and I'm going to say axios.get. Okay, I'm going to get the URL, which is this URL here. I'm going to copy and go back here, and let's paste that in here. And here I'm going to put variable called query. The query is going to come from the props. Let's do query here. All right, so after the string, after the URL, I'm going to put the params. Okay, so params. So down here I'm going to set the response into response.data. Right, and in catch we get the error from the API, and I'm going to set the error to error. Okay, and finally down here we need to set the loading back to false. All right, and what we need to return here, we need to return fetch data. I'm going to put error function here. Let's say fetch data. Okay, this fetch data will have a params, so let's put params, and down here as well params. All right, and this param here will be coming this function props, this param here. Okay, and down here we need to send also the response, set it equals to response, and loading, set it equals to loading, and error, set it equals to error. Okay, I think we're done with this useAxios. Now let's save and let's go to the components here, and let's create component called ButtonFilters. Let's say ButtonFilters.js file, and in here I'm going to generate functional best component and save. Let's go to app.js, and in here I'm going to put div and render the button filters down here. Okay, so if I save and let's take a look, button filters, cool. So now we are gonna styling this div. So let's say class name set equals to container, and I'm gonna set that the maximal, not the maximal, the mx auto, which is we're going to put the container into the center, and also I'm gonna set that the maximal width into 4xl, okay, which is 59 RAM. So now save and let's take a look. Cool. So now let's styling these button filters. Let's go back to button filters. Yeah, the first time we need to get the data from the API, and then we render the data, which is the button, the filters button, in down here. Okay, so now let's say cons, and I'm gonna set that equals to useAxios. Just make sure you import from hooks useAxios, and in here I'm going to say categories. All right, so it's going to be get the categories, which is api.public apis.org/category. All right, so in here we need to grab the fetch data and also the response and also the loading. Okay, and in here what we need to do is we need to run the fetch data inside a use effect. So let's put use effect here. The dependency is gonna be empty array, and in here I'm gonna say fetch data and run the function. So now here I'm going to console.log the response, so you can see. So let's say log response. So let's see into the browser. In here I'm going to inspect and go to console, make it bigger. So as you can see here, the first time is we have the empty object and then we get undefined. So what is problem? So let's go to network and see. Let's refresh that again. And as you can see, we get the data from the API. We get the data here in the response, the review here, as you can see, but it's not showing in the console. That's something wrong with useAxios, I think. So in here we need to add await. All right, so await. So now, as you can see down here, we get the data. As you can see, inside the categories key here. So now we need to basically destructuring the, let's close this useAxios. We need to destructuring the response here. I want to set that to response categories like so. And now we can render the categories in here. We can say if the categories, not console, if the category have a value, we need to say categories.map. We need to map through, and we grab the individual category, let's say button for this, and we are going to return a button here, okay, the button tag. So in here we need to put the button text here, and also let's styling this button a little bit. I'm gonna add the class name set equals to the background, let's say pink 400, and I'm gonna say text to white, and the margin, let's say 1, the padding vertically, I'm gonna set that to 1, and padding horizontally, I'm gonna set that to 2, okay. And I'm gonna add a rounded, let's say small, and if I hover the button, I need to change the background to pink 500. So now let's save and let's take a look. As you can see, I have all the button here, but the text is not in the center. So in div here, let's add the class name, set it equals to text center, text center, and I'm gonna add the margin vertically to 5 and save, and let's take a look. Awesome, really nice. But as you can see in here, if I refresh the browser, we don't get the loading skeleton because we don't handle yet. So now in here, we need to add condition. If the loading is true, we need to return a div here. All right. So in div here, I'm going to add the class name animate pulse, and the margin vertically, I'm going to set that to 5, and then the inline, let's say block, and also the text is going to be center, okay. And inside in here, I'm going to create array. Okay, I want to create array with 35 value, and then the value is going to be 0 until 34. Okay, and now here I'm going to map through the array, and I'm going to grab the individual number, and I'm going to returning div here. All right, so this div basically have a key set that equals to a number, and then have class name set that equals to, I'm gonna set that the height into 7, and the width, let's say 20, and also the background, let's say gray 300, and also the margin, let's say 1, and the rounded, I'm gonna set that to small, and then the inline, let's say inline block. So now save and let's take a look. If I refresh the browser, we get the loading skeleton. Really beautiful. And yeah, that's beautiful. And now we need to create the list of API down here. Let's create the component call ListApi.js file. So in here, let's generate RFCE, and this is going to be list API. And then let's remove the React, and I'm going to import the list API in here. So let's say list API. All right. So it's gonna be uppercase L like so. Now we should see this list API. So now let's go to list API component and styling this a little bit. Let's say history and list API. All right. In div here, I'm going to add the class name set that equals to the margin horizontally. I'm gonna set it to 2, and margin bottom set to 10. All right. So in history here, I'm going to add the class name. The font is semi-bold. The text will be XL, and also the color, let's say text slate, I'm gonna set it to 600. Okay, so now save, and we have this title here. So now I'm gonna showing you how to fetch the data from the API. Let's go to api.js here, and in here, like we did it in the button filters. So here, basically we can just copy that and put it in here. Instead of category, we need to grab the entries. Okay, of course it's not uppercase, entries. All right, so here we don't get the categories, we can remove that. And by default, when we refresh the browser, we need to run the fetch data like so. Okay, and the first time we need to run the fetch data, and we need to send the params. Okay, because remember in useAxios, so let's go to useAxios, we send the params here, as you can see, the params. Okay, so we can send the params in here. We can say params, and I'm gonna say object here, and let's category. I'm going to showing animals in the first time. Okay, so now of course we get the response. Right, now we need to send the response to the ListApi component. Let's say response set that equals to response and loading set that equals to loading. All right, so now save, and let's go to the ListApi. We can get the response and loading in here, so let's do structuring here. I'm gonna grab the response and the loading. All right, so down here, down the history, we need to create a div. Okay, this div is basically a grid, so let's put a display grid in here. I'm gonna say gap to 4, and also for the medium and more, I need to have grid column to 3, right? Which is 3 column. So in here, what I'm gonna do, let's say if we have a response value, we need to say response dot. We can grab the data inside the entries. Okay, entries, and then I'm gonna map through, and then in here I grab the individual API and then the index. Right? So I'm going to return the CardApi component. So let's create the CardApi component here. So I'm gonna say CardApi.js file. So in here, let's say rfce, and let's remove the React up here, and we need to render the CardApi in here. So we can say CardApi. All right, and now if I save, you will see error because useAxios is not defined in app.js file. So we need to import the useAxios from hooks here. Okay, so now save, and we still get a blank. What happened here? Let's go to console, and as you can see, cannot read property of undefined map. So we cannot read this response here. Let's go to this API, and let's comment this first, and I'm going to console log the response. Say response. Okay, so now let's refresh, and here we go. We get the data inside the entries. It should be no error here, so let's uncomment that out, and I'm gonna remove the console. Let's refresh. As you can see, we get the CardApi here. So as you can see in these entries, we have the API, the authentication, the category, course description, HTTP, and link. So in the CardApi, but first we need to send the API into the CardApi component. So let's say API set that equals to API, and now we can get the API in here. So let's grab the individual API, and in here I'm gonna use anchor tag, because if I click the card, I need to go to the link of the API. So in here, the ref, I need to say api.link, the link. Okay, because as you can see here, we get a link here. When we click the card, we need to go to this link, right? So inside this anchor tag, I'm gonna create a div here, and let's styling this div. I'm gonna add the class name, set that equals to the border. I'm gonna set that to 2. the border, let's say border color is going to be pink. I'm going to say 500. And also the text, I'm going to set that to gray 600. And also the rounded, I'm going to set that to let's say medium. And the background, let's say pink 100. And also when I hover the card, I need to change the background to pink, let's say 300. And the cursor, I'm going to set that to pointer. There's the pointer right here. And we need to put the height to full, right, which is 100% height. So inside this div here, basically I want to create a function up here. Let's give a name render detail. This function have two parameters basically. The first is text and then field, right? So this function will be returning paragraph, okay? And here I'm going to render the text and colon, and I'm going to render span here. Okay, this span is basically have a class name set that equals to font to semi bold, right? And inside this span, I'm gonna render API and the field. Okay, so if the API.field doesn't exist, I'm going to render dash here, like so. Wait, like so, right? So let's call this function down here. I'm going to say render detail and the text, let's say title, and the field of API. I'm going to showing this API field. So let's put the API here. So let's copy and paste for more time. And here is going to be the description down here. So let's put description. And we need to showing the authentication, which is right here. Let's paste that in here. And we need to showing the course. So let's do course. And we need to showing the category. Okay, let's copy, paste that in here. Let's save and let's take a look in the browser. Now we have this thing here, really nice. But as you can see, we don't get the padding here. So let's add a padding here. Let's say padding set to 2. And also when I click the card, I need to, the target is going to be underscore blank, which is when I click the card, it's going to be open a new tab. For example, let's click this doc fact. If I click, it's going to be open the link in new tab. Okay, that's what I want. But now if I search, for example, let's say doc, if I click enter, nothing happened because we don't implement the functionality in this search. Okay, so now we need to go to the app.js. We need to send the fetch data in this Jumbotron. So we need to say fetch data set equals to fetch data, and in this Jumbotron component we need to grab the fetch data like so. So in here we need to create state. So let's say const value and set value, so that equals to use state. By default is going to be empty string. Alright, so in this input here we need to set the value that equals to value, and also this type is basically search. Say search, and down here we need to add on change. Okay, on change event and set that equals to, grab the event, and then in here we set the value into e.target.value. So now this value here will have anything with typing in this input field. Okay, next down here we need to add on a down. Okay, so in here I'm going to run the handle enter function. So let's create the handle enter function. I'm going to say const handle enter set that equals to e, and in here we need to check, okay, if user typing enter, which is e.key set that equals to enter, okay, we need to fetch the data. Okay, we need to run the fetch data function. So in here we need to send params, okay, and this param will be title, okay, and we need to set value in here, okay, which is the value come from input field, right? So after I enter, I need to, the value is gonna be empty, so let's set the value here into empty string, okay. So now let's try. Let's search for a dog, and if I hit enter, as you can see, this is updated. Okay, we get dog here. And for example, I'm going to search for text, and if I hit enter, we get a text. Alright, so but we don't get the loading skeleton because we don't implement yet. But now we need to also handle this button. Okay, so in this button here, we need to add on click. Let's say on click event, set that equals to handle button search. All right, so now let's create this handle button search function up here. So I'm gonna say const handle button search. It's gonna be a row function, and in here I'm gonna check if the value not empty, okay, which is value.length. We need to fetch this data here. We need to just copy this and paste that in here. So now if I save, it's gonna be work. So now if I search for example a dog, if I click this button here, we get dog, right? So it's work now. But as you can see, the button filters here is not work. So let's make it work. Let's go back to app.js file, and we need to send the fetch data into these button filters. All right, so now let's go to button filters, and we can grab the fetch data here. So now let's go to this button here, and we need to add the on click event. So let's say on click, that equals to, I'm going to say click filter button function. Okay, so now let's create this function in here. I want to say const click filter button, and in here I'm going to, as you can see, this have the same name. Okay, we need to change the name. So now I'm gonna use fetch API. Okay, so now we can use this fetch API, and in here we can put the fetch API like so, and this is category, right? So we need to say params and category, and we put the e.target.value here. So let's say e is come from the event up here, okay, like so, and we can send e.target.value. But it's not gonna work because in button we don't put the value. So let's put value set equals to button, okay, this button here. So now if we put e.target.value, is gonna be get this value from this button. So let's save and let's try. In here I'm going to click news, and as you can see, we get all news here. Let's refresh. Oh, we get blank here, something wrong. As you can see here in ListApi, we cannot read map. So let's go to ListApi, and maybe we need to add dot entries here. Okay, so, and we need to add key as well. So let's say key set equals to index. All right, so now save, and if I refresh, as you can see, it's not blank, but we get some warning here. Okay, in button filters, it should have unique key. So let's go to button filters, and in this button here we need to add key. So let's say add key with key set that equals to the button. Okay, so now save, and if I refresh, as you can see, it's clean now. Okay, cool. So now let's click video, we get the video. Cool. Let's click book, we get book. Nice. But something we forget is the loading skeleton in this ListApi. Alright, so now let's go to ListApi and add the loading. So inside in here, I'm gonna check if the loading is true. I need to return a div here. Okay, div here. All right. So in div here, I'm going to add the class name set equals to, the margin top is gonna be 2, and it's gonna be grid. And for the medium, I'm gonna set the grid column to 3, and for the gap, let's say 4, and for the animate, I'm gonna say pulse. All right. So inside this div, I'm going to create array. So let's say dot 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 array, and I'm gonna say 5 value inside this array, and I'm gonna grab the keys. Okay, so this array will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, right? And here I'm gonna map through, and let's grab individual number, and in here I'm gonna return a div. All right, so let's put a key set that equals to number, and also in here I'm gonna add class name set equals to, the height I'm gonna set that to 28, the width I'm gonna set to full, the background let's say gray 300, and also the margin let's say 1, and also the rounded I'm gonna set that to small, right? And also down here, if the response dot entries is null, meaning if we don't get any response, we are going to return paragraph here. Okay, let's say return paragraph, and this is going to be something, let's say something, something went wrong. Okay, let's put emoticon here, let's say this one, and also I'm gonna add class name set equals to, the text is going to be center, the color let's say text gray 500, not 300, 500, and also the text will be 2XL, say 2XL, and also the margin top I'm gonna set that to 20. All right, now save, and let's take a look guys, the final project. As you can see, if I click anime we get the loading and then anime. If I click email we get the loading and then we get all category email. If I search for example UK, if I click enter we get all the UK here. Really nice. If I click tracking we get all the tracking. If I click games we get all the games and comics. Alright, I think we're done with this project guys. Hope you learned something new, and yeah, that's all gonna be it. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.